The examples in the video demonstrate how your volunteer hours make an enormous difference both for NYLPI and to the city as a whole, and in particular to those people in the city, the vulnerable populations that are growing larger at an alarming rate. Your generous support is needed more than ever, and it's more appreciated than ever in our history. Thank you for being here today, and thank you in advance for continuing to support the critical work of New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. The video only had time to show a few of our extraordinary staff, so I would like the staff to rise now and be recognized for their efforts every day to make New York City a model of social justice. I have a few special thank yous. I want to thank our General Counsel, Marian Engelman-Lotto, and our program directors, Lisa Isaacs, Roberta Muller, Gavin Carney, and Nisha Agarwal, for their outstanding leadership and their incredible commitment to our clients. Second, I want to thank Marnie Burke, who's the director of our pro bono program, and her team, Yunmi Chu and Peggy Germain, for their creativity, energy, and leadership. And I encourage each of you to call them and get involved in the work we're doing. I also want to thank the development team. They really did an extraordinary job this year. And so I want to thank Isabella Choa, Tanya Silas, John Dumais, and Katerina Herodotto for all that they've done this year. Now, I would like to introduce Judge Rakoff. Judge Rakoff will share with us his firsthand knowledge of Gary Naftalis's prowess as a lawyer, as well as his many contributions to the public good. Judge Rakoff is very qualified for this job, as he first met Gary Naftalis, our honoree, in 1973, when they served together in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Judge Rakoff served for 8 years in that office before entering private practice, and returned to public service in 1996 when he was appointed to the bench by President Clinton. Since that time, Judge Rakoff has been the epitome of the independent jurist, a role that is vital to our democracy. Judge Rakoff's many fine attributes were well described when Swarthmore conferred upon him an honorary degree in 2003. And I quote, "Judge Rakoff is broadly recognized as a legal thinker, scholar, and judge who not only elucidates and enforces the law, but interprets, defends, and challenges it in light of the principles of ethics and social justice that it is designed to serve. It is fitting to have such a wise jurist and principled person here today to introduce our very special honoree, Judge Rakoff."
Well, I want to thank Michael for that very kind introduction. If my wife were here, she would demand rebuttal time. Michael is laboring under a misimpression. I'm not here to honor Gary Naftalis. I'm here to honor what I would call the Naftalis Five. His 4 children, Ben, Josh, Sarah, and Dan, and his wife, Donna, because for God knows how many years now, they have lived with Gary. I wouldn't call it torture, but maybe waterboarding is the right term. In this era when Prisoners are being released from Guantanamo. Some of the Naftalis Five, are still stuck in Camp Gary. I say, free the Naftalis Five. And meantime, to his family, which also includes here today his brother Alan and his brother-in-law Aries and his future daughter-in-law Meredith, you have our sympathy. Well, I suppose I do have to say something about Gary Naftalis. It's said sometimes that great men have great foibles. Well, Gary is a very great man. But I'm a judge, I've got to be fair. So it would not be fair for me to mention that he's always late for every appointment without saying that he's rarely more than 1 hour late. It would not be fair for me to say that he gabs endlessly on the phone without saying that the rumor that his Christian name was Garrulus Naftalis is unsubstantiated. It would not be fair to even mention the rumor that he owes his success to his boyish good looks, because as far as I know, he's the only source of that rumor. But there is a method in Gary's madness, and I saw this when we were young assistant U.S. attorneys together way back in 1974, and Gary was prosecuting a very important case, a perjury case against Carmine Tremonti, the reputed head of the Lucchese organized crime family. Now, Tremonti had been indicted the year before for stock fraud, and at that trial, he had taken the stand, and in his very gruff voice, which he had, he said, "I know about arson, I know about extortion, I know about murder, but I don't know anything about stocks." By the way, keep this defense in mind. A number of stockbrokers are going to be using it these days. But he was acquitted. But fair is fair, so as soon as he was acquitted, the U.S. Attorney's Office turned around and indicted him for perjury for giving the testimony that led to his acquittal. And Gary was assigned the case. It was clear it was going to be a tough case. There was one benefit. The judge was your typical fair-minded federal judge of the Southern District who had not totally forgotten that he used to be chief of the criminal division of the U.S. Attorney's Office. But on the other hand, the defense counsel was extremely able, and the evidence was kind of weak. For example, one of the counts charged that Tremonti had lied when he denied knowing a fellow named Vincent Gugliero, who had been involved in stock fraud. And the government's entire proof of perjury on that count was a photo of Tremonti and Gugliero leaving a wedding along with 100 other people. There were some problems, and the trial was pretty short as befitted the evidence. We then got down to the evening before summations. In those days, the defense went first and the government second, but the judge had said that both summations had to be the next morning. And then I saw the magic of Gary's approach. He did three things to prepare for summation. First, he said, "Let's get dinner." So we went out and had dinner. That took about an hour and a half. He told me about all his previous victories. Then he said, let's call the defense attorney. So he calls the defense attorney on the phone, and for 2 hours, this is not an exaggeration, for 2 hours, he and the defense attorney gab on the phone, trying to out-macho each other with stories of their various exploits. And now it was about 11 o'clock, and I was getting kind of worried, and Gary had his last mention, his last rule for preparing. He said, it's 11 o'clock, let's go home. The next morning, defense counsel went first. Good as he was kind of unprepared, disorganized, disheveled. At one point, he actually spit on one of the jurors, which was probably not a good tactical move. And then Gary stood up, and without notes, he gave, over the next 90 minutes, one of the most beautifully crafted, beautifully organized summations I've ever seen. And a few hours later, the jury convicted on all counts. Now, it's often said that the key to being a great trial lawyer is preparation, preparation, and preparation. But as the story indicates, there is an exception for genius, and that was a genius at work that day. Now, many years later, Gary was awarded the Benemerenti Medal by the Pope. It was not for his work in the Tremonti trial. And it wasn't even for all the victories that he's had since in many, many high-profile cases representing people as famous as Michael Eisner, giant corporations. You remember when there used to be giant corporations. And the Wall Street Journal has described him as, quote, the Zelig of the white-collar bar. He's everywhere, close quote. And more recently, he was awarded, he was named as one of the top 10 trial lawyers in the entire United States. By the way, I noticed the other 9 are here, but I won't embarrass them by mentioning their names. The real reason Gary got that award and many other awards, including the very fine award that we are here this afternoon to present to him, is because of his magnificent pro bono work. Now, Gary, like other recipients of such awards, has given a lot of money to charitable organizations and legal pro bono groups. He has led government commissions, he's led bar associations. He's done all the things that a lawyer statesman is expected to do. But more important than any of that, in my view, he has himself, in the courtroom, spent an unbelievable number of hours defending people in pro bono public service litigation. I only have time to give one quick example, but back in the 1980s, the Blueberry treatment centers, which are centers that provide really wonderful service for children with cancer and other disabilities, was in deep financial troubles. And then they had what they thought was a godsend in that another nonprofit organization that was being dissolved but still had substantial assets decided under the Cypress doctrine to give all their assets to the Blueberry Centers. But then the Attorney General of the state of New York, who was aggressive even then, decided to challenge this, saying that a not-for-profit could not dictate to whom it was giving its assets when it was being dissolved. Well, Gary came in and he fought that case at 3 levels, and he finally won the case 7-0 in the Court of Appeals of the state of New York in a groundbreaking decision that also resuscitated the Cypress doctrine and made it the very vibrant doctrine that it still is today. So that's just one example, but my point is that Gary puts his mouth where his money is. Gary is one of those people who will go out there and spend countless hours in the courtroom and with clients in public service pro bono, free of charge activities. He is the perfect representative for the kind of award he's getting tonight. Now, I want to conclude by giving 3 cheers to Gary, and I took the liberty of reducing these cheers to rhyme as follows. Let's give a cheer for Gary Naftalis, so full of charm, so free of malice. He's never crude or cruel or callous, so give a cheer for Gary Naftalis. A second cheer for Gary Naftalis. To all his friends, he one great pal is. To sing his praise, the time right now is. So one more cheer for Gary Naftalis. Give one last cheer for Gary Naftalis. And to the spouse who his true gal is. So lift your voice and raise your chalice, 'cause I've run out of rhymes with Naftalis. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in applauding this year's recipient, Gary Naftalis.
I don't have any rhymes. Jed, thank you so much for your overly generous introduction. Your very gracious remarks, at least the last part, does underscore the difference between a eulogy and a tribute. In the case of a tribute, there is at least one person in the audience who actually believes what is being said. As I listened to those remarks, I was thinking of, as those who know me well know, I'm a rabid basketball fan, of what Connie Hawkins, a basketball legend, once said when he was being honored. I think he was being inducted into the NBA and got a very flowery tribute. He said, "The older I get, the better I used to be." So whether true or not, I enjoyed Jed's remarks, and in listening to them, I'm happy to follow the advice of my old high school football coach. I was a running back of no particular distinction. I had a lot of grit, but I did give a message to the maxim, you really can't coach speed. But when he put me in the game in my sophomore year, my first game, he said, "Kid, if you're lucky enough to reach the end zone and score a touchdown, for God's sakes, act like you've been there before." I'm deeply grateful to New York Lawyers for the Public Interest for choosing me to receive the Law and Society Award. It is really a quite special award, and the prior honorees, luminaries of both the private bar, public service, and the bench are really an extraordinary group, and I'm really humbled and honored to be included among them. And I gratefully accept this honor, and I'm very happy to support the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, and I'm so happy that so many of you have come here to support them, because it's an organization that does so much good in promoting social justice and ensuring that legal services are provided to the underrepresented. You know, when you make a speech at one of these events, you like to sort of say something which is both good and original, and that's the goal of any speaker. I think Jed did a good job at that. But the challenge is usually hardly ever met. There's a famous story about the composer Brahms when he was dealing with one of his students after hearing his composition. Brahms was reported to have said to the student, "Your work is both good and original." The student really got very flushed with pride, was really quite excited. He said, "There's only one problem." And the student says, "What's that?" He said, "Well, the good parts aren't original, and the original parts aren't very good." So then, rather than trying to be good and original, let me just salute the work of the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. I mean, the video gives you a small sample of the really terrific work that they do. And then let me just mention just one small part of it to emphasize it. I mean, their work in enhancing the civil rights of people with disabilities is really quite laudatory. There's apparently 140,000 kids in the New York City public schools who have special needs, and for the most part, they don't really get good service. And New York Lawyers for the Public Interest has really done an enormous amount there. They serve over 400 kids with disabilities each year, guiding them through the special ed system, helping them obtain appropriate services from the Department of Education. The Clearinghouse of New York Lawyers for the Public Interest mentors some 25 private lawyers to represent children with disabilities. In addition, they've had groundbreaking agreements with various drugstores, including Duane Reade's, to implement measures to make the facilities accessible. If you think about it, the need for access of people with disabilities in New York, it's a continuing problem. Even getting into taxi cabs, another area of the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, has been in the vanguard. It seems to me, if I were to say anything useful and substantive here, look, in these challenging economic times that we all read about, we all experience, I think it's doubly important for all of us who are members of the organized bar, to whom life has not been too bad. I mean, to do more, to try and do more to make sure that these essential services continue, and that the pro bono work of New York Lawyers for the Public Interest continue to be supported at the same levels they've historically been. I do want to thank some people for making this luncheon a success. I want to thank Judge Rakoff for taking time away from his courtroom to come here. I understand that his jury probably wants, I should give some thanks on their behalf, because they got a 3-hour lunch as a result of him coming here. I'd like to thank Chris Tabaz and the board, the New York Lawyers for the Public Interest, for honoring me by inviting me to accept this award. I want to thank all the friends and colleagues who were so gracious to serve as co-chairs of this event, and I really do appreciate that so much. I want to thank all the people who came here, the many colleagues, friends, clients who generously supported this lunch in these challenging economic times. You people really should be applauded. I want to thank the members of the bench. You really do honor me by the judges coming here, and I feel very honored and touched that so many judges would appear here. I'd like to thank, God, this sounds like the Oscars. The Slumdog Millionaire. I do want to thank Michael Rothenberg and the staff of New York Lawyers for the Public Interest for all the hard work they put in here. I mean, this luncheon would not be a success without all their efforts. I mean, having participated in it, I could see firsthand all the work they did, and it's just terrific. My assistant, Susan Aronson, who threw herself into this as she throws herself into all projects, she deserves my thanks. My partners at Kramer Levin, Neftalis and Frankel, for supporting this event and being as generous as they always are. I'd finally like to thank my family. Jed tried to steal my thunder by praising them, so I have no choice but to continue. Look, I've been blessed with a wonderful family. I have wonderful children and a wonderful wife. I think Stephen Sondheim said, and I think in Sunday in the Park with George, people leave two gifts when they leave children, and I think there was something called art. And I've been blessed with wonderful children. My sons, Josh and Ben, who are terrific lawyers, already doing better than I am. My son, Daniel, who's a teacher and a coach, and he puts his money where his mouth is in terms of mentoring children and coaching them in athletics. And my daughter, Sarah, who, in spite of her many protestations about the last thing in the world she would ever be as a lawyer, has never lost an argument to me in my entire life. And then especially to my wife, Donna, who's been together for 34 years. Whatever accomplishments I've done, I couldn't do without her. She's always there with me. My record with arguments with her is slightly better than with Sarah. I do remember winning one once 23 years ago, although Donna denies it. I've been instructed not to go over the allotted time, and I'm mindful that a luncheon for lawyers must end by 2 o'clock. I was at a lunch a few months ago where Judge Gleason received the Weinfeld Award, and he pointed out that if Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech began at 1:45, the lawyers would have all walked out. But I am reminded what Yogi Berra said, another great legal philosopher. When he and his wife were driving around in circles, he said, "We may be lost, but we're making good time." I think we're making good time here. Of course, when Yogi was asked what time it is, he said, "Do you really mean right now?" So despite Yogi's wisdom, I've been admonished that to bring my speech to a close, which does remind me of one of my favorite stories of... This is one I told the night we were working on the Tremonti summation. It's about the moderator at the Bar Association when there was a speaker who was going on and on and on and wouldn't shut up. He just droned on, and people were walking out. And as is the fashion at those events, the moderator often passes notes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, your time is up, shut up, stop. And in any event, the speaker just ignored him and continued to go on and on and on. So finally, the moderator went over with the gavel, and he goes up to the lectern and to bang the gavel down to end this speech or filibuster. But what he does is misses, and he hits the president of the Bar Association right on the head. The groggy president of the Bar Association looks up at him and says, "Hit me again, I can still hear him." Well, let me just thank, since I don't want that to be repeated, I think I'll bring this to an end. I want to thank everybody so much for coming. You've made this a very special day for me and for the New York lawyers, for the public interests. I'll never forget this. Thank you.
That's it. We'll see you next year. Thank you.